You're lying in bed scrolling through your phone when you see it. Someone your age just bought a house. Someone else launched a business. Another post about promotions, milestones, engagement photos. Your chest tightens, and the quiet thought lands hard, I'm behind. You don't like admitting how quickly that comparison turns into self-hate. Here's the interruption you can use today, exactly as written: being behind is information, not identity. Say it once and put the phone down. Stand up. Take 10 slow steps across the room without checking anything else. In the next 10 minutes, the intensity drops from sharp to manageable. You stop treating your current position like a verdict on who you are, and the urge to quit everything softens just enough to think. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. This won't rush you, but it will keep you from spiraling. The pain here isn't ambition. It's the sudden shift from motivation to shame. One comparison flips a switch. Instead of thinking, I want that, you think, I'm failing. Instead of planning your next step, you scroll harder or shut down completely. This is costing you momentum because shame doesn't energize, it paralyzes. You either avoid your work and money goals entirely, or you attack yourself so harshly that progress feels pointless. What makes this especially dangerous is how convincing the story feels. Everyone else looks ahead. You look late. The mind fills in the gaps with exaggerated conclusions. You missed your window, you made the wrong choices, and you're not built for this. That story doesn't push you forward. It makes you smaller. By the end of this lesson, you won't erase comparison from your life. What you'll learn is how to stop shame from turning into quitting. You'll know how to convert the feeling of being behind into usable information instead of identity. You'll be able to build momentum on work and money goals without pretending you're already where you want to be. The goal isn't fake confidence, it's stable self-respect while you're still building. If learning how to stop shame from derailing your progress feels useful, these lessons are designed to give you tools that work in the exact moments you'd normally spiral. Subscribe for more lessons like this. First, you'll learn how to separate facts from the story your mind builds around them. Next, you'll see how to replace self-attack with a narrow action that restores agency. Then, you'll practice handling the pressure that shows up when comparison hits again the next day. Finally, you'll watch how these pieces come together in a real scenario where the shame spike doesn't disappear, but it no longer controls your behavior. There's a moment later where you're staring at your bank account or your unfinished project, and the voice in your head says it's already too late. When that moment hits, you'll know how to stop the spiral before it turns into another week of avoidance. You're sitting at your desk after seeing that post. The comparison is still buzzing in your head. You open your laptop to work on your own project, but instead of clarity, you feel heaviness. The thought repeats, I should be further than this. Your energy drops. You hover over the keyboard and do nothing. Here's the lived example most people recognize. You weren't even in a bad mood. You were moving through your day. Then one comparison shifts your internal narrative. Within minutes, the story grows, they're ahead, you're late, you wasted time, and you don't have what it takes. The emotional tone changes from neutral to harsh. The first correction isn't motivational. It's structural. Here's the microscript, exactly as written. What are the measurable facts, without interpretation? Say it once and answer it in writing. This works because comparison shame thrives on exaggeration. The mind blends timelines, resources, background, and context into one unfair scoreboard. By forcing yourself to write measurable facts only, you interrupt the story-building mechanism. Picture this in a familiar North American scenario. You see someone post about buying their first home at 29. Your mind jumps to, I'm financially irresponsible. Instead of arguing with that thought, you ask the question. The facts might be, you rent, you have X in savings, you carry Y in debt, and you earn Z per year. None of those facts contain moral judgment. They're numbers and circumstances. Here's the tiny action you can take today. When comparison hits, write down 3 measurable facts about your own situation without adjectives. No good, no bad, no late, no behind. Just data. Either you did this or you didn't. Now slow this down for a brief practice. Imagine writing those facts on paper. Notice how different that feels from scrolling. Writing slows the spiral. It moves you from reaction to examination. A common mistake here is trying to replace shame with positive affirmations immediately. You tell yourself you're doing great, you're on your own timeline, everything happens for a reason. Those statements may be true, but if the shame is strong, they bounce off. Facts are steadier than affirmations. They ground you before you try to encourage yourself. Why this works is simple. Shame attaches identity to circumstance. It says, because this is my situation, this is who I am. When you isolate facts, you remove identity from the equation. You're not your current bank balance. You're not your timeline. You're observing variables. Another version of this shows up in career comparison. You see someone promoted. Your mind says, I'm stuck. The measurable facts might be, you've been in your role for 2 years, you've completed 3 projects, and you've applied to 2 internal positions. Those facts may reveal progress or gaps, but they don't label you as defective. Here's a brief slow practice you can do right now. Close your eyes and imagine the word behind floating in front of you. Then imagine replacing it with a spreadsheet of neutral numbers. The emotional charge drops slightly, doesn't it? Not gone, but reduced. This matters because you cannot build momentum from identity attacks. If you believe you are the problem, action feels pointless. If you see the situation as variables, action becomes possible. Another mistake to watch for is secretly adding interpretation while pretending it's fact. Writing I only have $3,000 in savings sneaks judgment back in. Write savings, $3,000. That's it. Clean data. The power here isn't in pretending everything is fine. It's in separating reality from narrative. Once the narrative loosens, even slightly, you regain choice. As you move forward, you'll notice something else. Even after you isolate the facts, the emotional residue may still linger. The shame doesn't vanish just because you wrote numbers down. That's normal. Facts stabilize the ground, but they don't create momentum yet. That's where the next piece comes in. Once the identity attack is interrupted, you need a way to move, something small and specific that proves you are not frozen in place. Without that step, the mind drifts back to comparison. With it, you begin replacing self-hate with action. You've written the facts down. Savings, $3,000. Debt, $8,500. Years in current role, 2. Applications sent, 2. The numbers are cleaner than the story in your head, but the heaviness is still there. You're no longer spiraling, but you're not exactly energized either. The shame has softened, not disappeared. This is where most people stall. The mistake here is waiting to feel confident before taking action. You tell yourself, once I believe in myself more, I'll start. Or, once I'm less embarrassed about where I am, I'll move. That delay quietly turns into avoidance. Shame doesn't leave because you feel better. It leaves because you act differently. Here's the correction, you don't aim for motivation. You aim for proof of movement. Here's the rule, exactly as written, one action today that reduces the gap by 1%. Not 10%. Not life-changing. 1%. This works because comparison makes the gap feel enormous. If someone else looks 10 years ahead of you, your mind tries to solve 10 years at once. That's overwhelming. 1% is manageable. 1% is specific. Picture this in a familiar North American context. You're behind on savings compared to peers. The shame tells you you're financially irresponsible. Instead of trying to overhaul your entire budget, you transfer $25 into savings or cancel one unused subscription. That's 1%. It doesn't fix everything. It changes direction. Or career-wise, you feel late to the game. Instead of rewriting your entire resume at midnight in a panic, you update one bullet point or reach out to one contact. 1%. Here's the tiny action you can take today. Define what 1% looks like in one area you feel behind in. Then complete it before the day ends. Measurable. Concrete. Either you did it or you didn't. Now pause for a brief pattern interrupt. Ask yourself, if I couldn't fix everything, what would still move me forward slightly? That question narrows the field. It stops the mind from catastrophizing. A common mistake here is choosing an action that's too large and calling it 1%. If it feels heavy or intimidating, it's too big. The goal is completion, not intensity. Completion rebuilds agency. Another mistake is dismissing small actions as insignificant. Shame says, that's nothing. But nothing is what shame prefers, because nothing keeps you stuck. 1% repeated daily compounds. Nothing compounds regret. Why this works is grounded in identity repair. When you feel behind, you often start seeing yourself as someone who doesn't follow through. Each small completed action contradicts that identity quietly but powerfully. You don't argue with shame. You disprove it. Here's a slow practice you can try mentally. Imagine yourself finishing one small action tonight. Picture checking it off. Notice the shift in posture. It's not exciting. It's steadiness. That steadiness matters more than hype. Another layer here is that action narrows comparison. When you're inactive, your mind drifts outward, scrolling, comparing, and calculating. When you're active, your attention contracts around the task. Movement reduces mental bandwidth for self-attack. This matters because comparison isn't going away tomorrow. You'll see another post. Another milestone. Another reminder of where you think you should be. If your only defense is positive thinking, you'll keep getting knocked over. If your defense is 1% action, you'll keep moving regardless of mood. Notice the shift in progression now. First, you separated fact from narrative. Then, you replaced identity shame with measurable action. You didn't pretend to be ahead. You chose movement. As we move forward, the pressure increases again. There will be moments when you take that 1% action and still feel embarrassed about your starting point. That's where this skill gets stress tested. You'll need a way to protect your self-respect even while you're visibly building from a place that feels behind. That's where the next idea comes in, and where emotional control becomes long-term resilience instead of a temporary fix. There's a belief that quietly poisons progress when you feel behind. I don't deserve to feel proud until I've caught up. It sounds humble. It sounds disciplined. But under pressure, it becomes cruel. You tell yourself you'll allow self-respect later, after the savings grow, after the promotion comes, after the numbers improve. Here's the myth to drop. Self-respect is not a reward for arrival. It's fuel for movement. When you postpone self-respect until you deserve it, every small action feels insufficient. You transfer the $25. You update the resume bullet. You send the email. And immediately the voice says, that's still not enough. The gap reopens, and the shame creeps back in. The instruction here is not emotional hype. It's structural reinforcement. Here's the rule, exactly as written, I respect effort while the outcome is still pending. Say it once, preferably out loud, after you complete your 1% action. This works because comparison attaches value to results only. It says your worth equals your visible progress. By deliberately respecting effort, you shift the measurement. You're no longer evaluating yourself only by how far you've gone, you're evaluating by whether you moved at all. Picture this in a familiar North American context. You're working on a side project while juggling a full-time job. You see others who appear further ahead. After you finish a small step, drafting a page, making a call, you feel tempted to minimize it. Instead, you pause and acknowledge it. Not dramatically. Not performatively. Just quietly, that counted. Here's the tiny action you can take today. After completing your 1% action, write down one sentence beginning with "Today I showed up by." Keep it factual. No exaggeration. Either you wrote it or you didn't. Now slow this down for a brief practice. Imagine finishing a small step and letting it land for 5 seconds before rushing to the next comparison. Notice how unfamiliar that feels. That unfamiliarity is important. Many people are trained to overlook effort if it doesn't produce immediate visible gain. A common mistake here is confusing self-respect with complacency. You worry that if you allow yourself to feel okay before you've caught up, you'll lose your drive. But shame isn't sustainable fuel. It burns hot and fast, then leaves avoidance behind. Self-respect stabilizes. It allows you to continue without self-attack. Another mistake is tying self-respect to external validation. You think, "I'll feel better once someone notices." That keeps you dependent on comparison again. Respecting effort internally removes that dependency. Why this works is grounded in identity formation. When you consistently acknowledge effort, you begin to see yourself as someone who builds, even if the building is slow. That identity is far more resilient than one tied to milestones. Milestones fluctuate. Effort compounds. Here's a brief slow practice you can do right now. Think about the last small action you took toward a goal. Instead of evaluating how far it moved you, focus only on the fact that you did it. Notice the slight shift in posture when you allow that to matter. This matters because comparison will continue showing you outcomes, houses, titles, numbers. You rarely see the effort behind those outcomes. If you only value visible results, you'll constantly feel late. If you value effort, you stay grounded in what's actually within your control. There's another layer to this. When you respect effort, you reduce the emotional volatility tied to setbacks. If something doesn't work out, a job application rejected, a financial setback, you're less likely to interpret it as proof of personal failure. You can say, "I'm still building," instead of, "I'm broken." Notice the progression now. First, you separated facts from narrative. Then, you replaced shame with 1% action. Now, you're reinforcing that action with earned self-respect. You're building an internal structure that doesn't collapse every time comparison shows up. There's a vignette coming where this gets fully tested. You'll see what happens when you take action, respect the effort, and still encounter visible reminders that others are ahead. That's where this framework proves whether it's fragile or durable, and where emotional control turns from a technique into a habit. You're at your kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with your laptop open and your bank app pulled up. The numbers aren't catastrophic, but they aren't impressive either. You remember the post from earlier in the week about someone your age closing on a house. That image comes back uninvited. Your stomach tightens. The old reaction starts building fast. You should be further by now. You wasted your 20s. You don't even know what you're doing. The tone in your head sharpens. You feel the urge to close the laptop and distract yourself, anything to get away from the discomfort. This is usually where the spiral wins. You pause. You remember the first step. Facts without interpretation. You grab a notepad and write. Savings, $3,200. Credit card balance, $4,800. Income, $62,000 per year. No adjectives. No commentary. Just numbers. The shame is still there, but it's less chaotic. The numbers are grounded. They don't insult you. They just sit there. The old voice tries again. Other people are ahead. You catch it. That's narrative, not data. You move to the second step. One action today that reduces the gap by 1%. You scan the numbers. What's 1% here? You could transfer $50 into savings. You could cancel one subscription you forgot about. You could schedule a call with a financial advisor. You pick the smallest action that still moves something. You cancel a recurring $18 charge you haven't used in months and transfer $25 into savings. It takes 7 minutes. It doesn't change your life. but it changes the direction. The old reaction almost dismisses it. That's nothing. You feel that urge to minimize the effort before it even lands. You don't let it pass unchallenged. I respect effort while the outcome is still pending, you say quietly. It feels awkward. Slightly forced. But you stay with it. You write one sentence, today I showed up by reducing one expense and adding to savings. You sit there for a moment. The numbers haven't transformed. The gap hasn't disappeared. But something inside feels steadier. The comparison hasn't vanished, but it's no longer crushing. Later that evening, you open your laptop again to work on a professional certification you've been putting off. As soon as the course dashboard loads, the shame flickers back. You should have finished this months ago. You feel the familiar urge to procrastinate. The old pattern almost takes control. You don't argue with the thought. You apply the framework again. Facts: course progress 30%. Deadline flexible. Study time available tonight, 40 minutes. 1% action, complete one lesson, not 3. You start the timer. Halfway through, your mind drifts to someone you know who already passed the certification. The comparison resurfaces. This time, instead of spiraling, you feel it and keep moving. The lesson finishes. You check it off. You don't feel triumphant. You feel composed. Before closing the laptop, you repeat the line, I respect effort while the outcome is still pending. The gap still exists. You're not suddenly ahead. But you didn't avoid it. You didn't attack yourself into paralysis. You didn't quit. That night, as you lie in bed, the same social media posts float through your memory. They still sting slightly. But they don't dominate. You think about the canceled subscription. The $25 transfer. The completed lesson. Not impressive. But real. The situation isn't resolved. Your savings aren't where you want them. Your career isn't fully aligned. There's still distance between where you are and where you'd like to be. But you're no longer frozen in self-hate. You're building. And for the first time in a while, that feels like enough to keep going. What you've been practicing in this lesson is the difference between reacting to comparison with shame and responding with structure. Reacting looks like scrolling, attacking yourself, and then quitting or numbing out. Responding looks like separating fact from story, choosing 1% action, and reinforcing effort before outcomes arrive. One path drains your momentum. The other builds it quietly. First, you interrupted the identity spiral by separating measurable facts from interpretation. That move alone shifted I'm a failure into neutral data you could work with. Then, you replaced shame with 1% action, small, specific movement that reduced the gap instead of staring at it. Next, you reinforced that action with deliberate self-respect, reminding yourself that effort counts even when results aren't visible yet. Finally, you saw how this works in real time. Comparison still appeared, but it didn't control your behavior. You stayed in motion. The core lesson is simple: feeling behind is a perception, quitting is a choice. You can't always control the comparison trigger. You can control what you do in the 5 minutes after it hits. When you replace self-attack with measurable action, you stop turning discomfort into identity. You become someone who builds, even if the building is slow. Now let's lock this into action with 3 clear steps you can use today. First, the next time comparison hits, write down 3 measurable facts without adjectives. No labels. No conclusions. Just numbers or circumstances. This interrupts the narrative before it hardens into shame. Second, define 1% in one area you feel behind in and complete it before the day ends. Keep it small enough that completion is guaranteed. Momentum is built through repetition, not intensity. Third, after completing that action, say the line out loud, I respect effort while the outcome is still pending. Then write one factual sentence beginning with today I showed up by. This anchors self-respect to behavior, not milestones. As you continue building this skill, the next layer is learning how to handle external pressure without letting it dictate your timeline, how to navigate conversations with family, peers, or coworkers who unintentionally amplify the feeling of being behind. A natural follow-up lesson would be something like emotional control, handling timeline pressure without exploding or shrinking, because comparison doesn't only live online. It lives in conversations too. You don't need to eliminate ambition. You don't need to pretend you're satisfied with where you are. What you're building is stability while you improve. That stability prevents the cycle of shame, avoidance, and regret. It allows you to move consistently instead of in bursts of self-criticism. Over time, this compounds. 1% action stack. Facts replace exaggerated narratives. Effort becomes something you recognize instead of dismiss. And self-respect stops being something you'll allow later. It becomes something you practice now. You're not behind in life. You're somewhere on a timeline that is still moving. The only way you truly lose ground is by quitting out of shame. When you respond with structure instead of self-hate, you protect your momentum and your dignity. If you want continued emotional control that keeps you building even when comparison hits hard, subscribe and keep building this skill.